I never thought I'd be the kind of person to share something like this. I've always been the skeptic in my family, the one who rolls their eyes at ghost stories, the one who looks for logical explanations. But what happened to me a few years ago in the small cemetery near the church in my hometown still keeps me awake at night. I can't explain it. And believe me, I've tried. It was autumn, late October, the kind of time of year when the air carries that sharp edge of cold and the smell of burning leaves. My grandmother had passed away earlier that month, and my family buried her in that churchyard cemetery. After the funeral, I found myself visiting her grave more often than I expected. She had practically raised me, and sitting there among the stones felt like the closest I could be to her. One particular evening, I stayed later than usual. The sun had already dropped behind the horizon, leaving the sky bruised in shades of deep purple and gray. The shadows of the trees stretched long across the grass, and the church lights cast a soft glow that barely reached into the cemetery. I remember thinking I should leave, but I wasn't ready yet. I sat by her headstone, tracing the letters of her name with my fingertips, whispering things I wished I'd told her when she was alive. That's when I noticed something strange. A low hum. At first, I thought it was the wind vibrating through the old wrought iron fence that surrounded the cemetery. But there was no wind. The air was still, heavy, like it was waiting for something. The hum grew louder, deeper, until it sounded more like a chant, or maybe a moan. My skin prickled and I forced myself to look around. Nothing. Just rows of gravestones and the dark outline of trees. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was tired, imagining things, but then I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Between two tall gravestones, a figure stood. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was tall, wearing what seemed like a long coat, the kind that looked old-fashioned, out of place in modern times. He didn't move. He didn't sway. He just stood there, facing me. I froze, my mouth dry. My first thought was that it was another mourner, someone visiting a loved one late. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized there was something wrong. I could see through him. It wasn't clear like glass. It was more like smoke, or mist shaped into the outline of a man. The longer I stared, the more the edges of his form seemed to waver, like heat rising off pavement. My chest tightened. I whispered out loud, "Hello?" My voice cracked. The figure didn't respond. It just tilted its head slightly as if curious. The humming grew louder. It wasn't coming from the figure, it was all around me now, vibrating in my bones. I scrambled to my feet, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But my legs felt heavy, sluggish, like I was moving through water. The figure began to move toward me. It didn't walk the way people walk. Its legs didn't bend right. Its steps were too slow, too deliberate, like every movement was being dragged out. And yet, it covered the distance between us far faster than it should have. My grandmother's grave was right beside me, and for a moment, I almost thought of dropping to my knees and praying. But fear took over and I turned and ran. I sprinted through the cemetery, weaving between headstones, my breath tearing out of my chest. The humming grew to a roar, a sound so loud it felt like it was splitting my skull. My vision blurred with tears and panic. I didn't dare look back. When I reached the gate, I nearly tripped over the uneven ground, but I managed to shove it open and stumble onto the empty street. The second my feet left the cemetery grounds, the sound stopped. Dead silence. I turned back, gasping for breath, and the cemetery lay behind me in darkness. No figure. No hum. Nothing but shadows. For a long moment, I just stood there, bent over, clutching my knees, trying not to throw up from the adrenaline flooding my body. I convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe grief was making me see things. That's what I told myself as I walked home that night, trembling with every step. But deep down, I knew it wasn't imagination. Few weeks later, I was sitting at dinner with my parents when my father, out of nowhere, said, "Did you ever hear the story about the man in the cemetery?" My fork froze halfway to my mouth. He went on to explain that, for decades, people in our town had claimed to see a tall man in a long coat wandering near the churchyard. Some said he was a grieving father who had lost his whole family to disease in the 1800s. Others believed he was a pastor who had taken his own life and was cursed to roam the grounds forever. My father chuckled as he told it, brushing it off as superstition. But my hand shook so badly I had to set down my fork. Because I had seen him. I hadn't known the story, but I had seen him. Even now, years later, I can still picture him, standing among the stones, his smoky body shifting against the night, his head tilted like he was studying me. I haven't gone back to that cemetery since. I don't even like driving past it. I still visit my grandmother, but I bring flowers to her memory in my own way, at home, in my heart. Because nothing on earth could make me walk back into that graveyard after dark. I grew up in a small town where everybody knew about the old cemetery at the far edge of the neighborhood. It wasn't a big one like the sprawling cemeteries you'd see in the city, but it had been there for well over 100 years. Families buried their loved ones there for generations, and the older graves were so worn down that you could barely read the inscriptions anymore. As a kid, the cemetery never really bothered me. I passed it on my way to school, on bike rides, even during lazy evening walks. Sometimes my friends dared each other to peek over the iron fence after dark, but I never joined in. It wasn't that I was scared, it just felt wrong, like walking on ground that didn't belong to you. But one night, when I was 19, I learned why so many people in town avoided that place. It happened after visiting a friend who lived a couple of blocks over. We'd stayed up late talking and playing video games, and by the time I left it was close to midnight. The fastest way home was to cut through the path that ran alongside the cemetery. I hesitated at first. Most people avoided it after dark for a reason, but the thought of adding 15 extra minutes to my walk made me push away that hesitation. It's just a shortcut, I told myself. There's nothing there. Just stones and dirt. The night was unusually still. The air was heavy, almost damp, and the streetlights along the way flickered like they were struggling to stay alive. Each one buzzed faintly, casting weak yellow light across the cracked pavement. By the time I reached the edge of the cemetery, the silence around me was so thick it made my chest feel tight. That's when I noticed something strange. The usual night sounds, the distant barking of dogs, the occasional rumble of a passing car, the endless chorus of crickets, had vanished. It was as if someone had pressed mute on the world. My own footsteps on the pavement suddenly felt too loud, echoing into the night with no background noise to soften them. The iron fence of the cemetery loomed tall and dark beside me. As I walked, I kept my eyes straight ahead, telling myself not to look inside. But the human mind doesn't always cooperate. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement among the gravestones. I told myself it was just shadows, maybe the branches of a tree shifting in the breeze. Except, there was no breeze. Not even the leaves moved. My pace quickened, but curiosity got the better of me, and I finally turned my head to glance inside. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of my vision. A pale, almost glowing shape standing among the graves. The light from the nearest flickering lamp post barely reached that far, but the figure seemed to stand out against the darkness, as if it carried its own dim light. It wasn't walking. It wasn't swaying like a person would. It almost looked like it was floating just above the ground. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My body screamed at me to move, but my legs felt like they had turned to stone. The figure lifted its head. Though I couldn't make out a face, I felt it looking at me, staring right through me. It was one of the most suffocating sensations I've ever experienced. Like every secret, every fear I'd ever buried inside myself was suddenly exposed under its gaze. The air around me dropped in temperature so fast I could see my breath billowing in front of me, white clouds forming even though it wasn't winter. My skin prickled, goosebumps crawling across my arms and neck. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not the solid, steady kind you'd expect on pavement or grass. These were uneven, dragging, echoing in a way that didn't make sense. They weren't coming from me, they were coming from inside the cemetery. My survival instincts finally kicked in. I bolted. I ran so fast down that sidewalk that my lungs burned and my chest ached, but I didn't dare slow down. The whole time I could hear those footsteps keeping pace with me. Not exactly behind me, not exactly beside me, somewhere in the air, like they were following but not bound to the ground. When I finally reached the end of the block and turned the corner onto my street, the sound stopped. Just like that. The cold vanished too. The night came alive again with crickets and the distant sounds of the town. I stumbled to a stop, gasping for breath, and dared myself to look back. The cemetery sat in the distance, still and quiet, as though nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that glowing figure staring at me, and I heard those footsteps chasing me down the road. The next morning, I told myself it was just exhaustion, my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew better. And I wasn't the only one. When I finally mentioned it to an older neighbor, he gave me a look I'll never forget. He didn't laugh, didn't brush it off. He just said, "You saw her." Apparently, for years, people in town had whispered about a woman's ghost wandering that cemetery. No one knew exactly who she was. Some said she was buried without family, others said she was the victim of a tragedy no one wanted to talk about, but the story was the same. If you walked past the cemetery alone at night, she would follow. I never took that shortcut again. To this day, even when I drive past that place, I feel my stomach tighten. The memory of that figure, the way it locked onto me, is burned into my mind forever. I don't usually tell this story. When I have, people either laugh nervously or change the subject as if speaking about it too much might invite something into the room. But this happened to me, and the memory of it still clings to me like cold air on a winter night. It was almost 10 years ago, though in my mind it's as vivid as last week. I had gone to visit my cousin in a nearby town and stayed later than I meant to. By the time I finally left, it was close to midnight. The road home was long, narrow, and lonely. And worst of all, it passed directly by the old graveyard on the outskirts of town. Everyone knew that cemetery. People whispered about it constantly. Kids dared each other to sneak in at night, but most of us never made it past the rusted gate. The ground there seemed wrong. The tombstones leaned in strange directions, the inscriptions worn away until they looked like scars in stone. At the center of it all was a massive banyan tree whose roots twisted like skeletal arms gripping the earth. Even during the day, it looked like something out of a nightmare. That night, I kept my car steady, my headlights slicing through the fog that had rolled in from the river. The mist made the world small, like I was driving inside a tunnel carved out of white smoke. I turned the radio on low, just enough to keep myself company, but even the music seemed swallowed by the silence. I remember gripping the steering wheel tightly, whispering to myself, "It's just a graveyard. Just stones and grass." But the closer I got, the heavier the air felt. It was as if the night itself pressed against my chest, thick and unyielding. That was when I saw it, at first just a flicker of pale light deep within the cemetery. It shimmered faintly between the tombstones, almost like someone holding a lantern. My heart skipped. Maybe it was a caretaker? But no one tended that cemetery at night. I slowed the car instinctively, my eyes narrowing against the fog. And then I saw her. A woman. She was standing among the graves, no more than 20 or 30 feet from the road. Her sari was white but not dull, it glowed, faintly shimmering as if woven from the mist itself. Her skin looked almost translucent, her outline blurred at the edges. And she was waving. The gesture was slow, deliberate, unnervingly patient. Her hand lifted, paused, then fell. Lifted again. Like she had all the time in the world. For a few seconds I was frozen. My brain scrambled for explanations. Maybe it was a villager dressed in white playing a prank? But something in my gut told me this was no prank. Her movements weren't natural. The way her head tilted as she waved, the stillness of her body, the way her eyes, though I couldn't see them clearly, felt locked onto mine. A chill shot down my spine. My foot slammed harder on the accelerator, but my eyes betrayed me. They kept flicking back toward her. And that's when terror truly set in. When I looked into my rearview mirror, she wasn't standing among the graves anymore. She was at the gate. Closer. still waving. The car swerved as panic jolted through me. My palms were slick with sweat, the wheel slippery beneath my fingers. My chest hammered so violently it drowned out the hum of the engine. Somehow, by sheer will, I steadied the car and kept driving, though I couldn't stop glancing into the mirror. Each time, I half expected to see her right behind me, her glowing figure floating closer and closer. But she never moved from the gate. When the graveyard finally slipped into the distance, I realized I had been holding my breath. I exhaled so sharply it felt like the air might tear from my lungs. But I didn't relax, not really. My body stayed rigid, my knuckles white on the wheel until I reached my home and parked in front of the gate. Even I couldn't bring myself to get out. I sat there in the driver's seat, shaking, replaying what I'd seen again and again. Eventually, I convinced myself I had imagined it. I was tired, it was late, the fog was thick. My mind must have conjured the figure. But when I told my mother the next morning, her face drained of color. She told me about the legend. For decades, people in our area had spoken of a woman in white who appears in the graveyard at night. Some say she was a young bride who died tragically in a car accident on that very road. Others claim she was buried alive under false suspicion of betrayal, her restless spirit tied to the earth that betrayed her. The stories differ, but one thing remains the same: she waves at travelers. And those who stop, those who give in to her beckoning, are never seen again. That part froze me more than anything. Because the way she had waved, it wasn't casual. It wasn't playful. It was insistence. A command disguised as a greeting. In the years since, I've driven that road dozens of times, but I've never seen her again. Still, whenever I approach that cemetery, I roll up my windows, grip the wheel tighter, and pray silently until I've passed. But the memory never leaves. The sight of her pale figure in the mist, arm rising and falling with that hypnotic rhythm, it's burned into my mind. Sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I find myself staring at the shadows in my room, half expecting her to emerge, still waving, still beckoning. And in those moments, I wonder what would have happened if I had stopped. Would she have stepped forward, revealing her face at last? Would she have spoken? Or would I have simply disappeared, swallowed by the fog in the graves, another forgotten soul bound to that cursed earth? I'll never know. But I do know this: I'll never forget the waving lady. I'm I've always believed that some places carry echoes of the people who came before us. Cemeteries are one of those places. You don't just bury the body, you bury the memories, the grief, the unfinished stories. That's what I thought on the night it happened. I was 19 at the time, just a university student visiting my grandparents in their small town. Their house sat on the edge of a quiet road, the kind where streetlights were few and the nights seemed darker than they should. About a quarter mile away was the old cemetery, a place I had walked past countless times, though always in the day. One evening, my grandfather asked me to go to the small shop down the road to fetch some salt. It was late, but I didn't think much of it. I pulled on a jacket and set off, phone in hand, the weak glow of the screen guiding me almost as much as the dim lamps on the road. The air was thick, unusually still, and the kind of silence where every sound feels amplified. My footsteps crunched louder than they should have on the gravel. As I drew closer to the cemetery, I felt that subtle shift in the air, something I'd always noticed though I never admitted it to anyone. Even walking past in the day gave me goosebumps, but at night, it was like stepping into a different world. The gates loomed ahead, black iron with peeling paint, and the gravestones stretched into the darkness beyond like crooked teeth. That's when I heard it. At first, it was so faint I thought it was my imagination. A voice, raspy, low, urgent. It called my name. I froze mid-step. My eyes darted around, searching for movement, but there was nothing, just the silent graves and the windless night. My ears strained, convinced it had been a trick. Then it came again. I swear my blood turned to ice. The voice was clear this time. Too clear. It was a man's voice, but aged, cracked, like someone speaking through a throat filled with dust. And it came from inside the cemetery. Logic tried to explain it away. Maybe someone I knew was playing a prank? Maybe a drunk or someone passing by. But the sound wasn't natural. It didn't echo, didn't scatter into the air the way voices usually do. It was direct, sharp, as though whispered directly into my ear. I gripped my phone tighter and turned up the brightness, holding it like a flashlight toward the gates. My breath hitched. Nothing. The grave stretched silently before me, shadows clinging to the stones. No figure, no movement. Then louder. Don't go. It was the same voice, desperate this time, laced with warning. My heart pounded in my chest. Don't go where? To the shop? To the house? Into the cemetery? The ambiguity clawed at me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but another part of me, the foolish, curious part, needed to be sure. I edged closer to the gate, my phone's light flickering against the rusted bars. My fingers shook and I could barely breathe. And then I saw it. Between two gravestones, maybe 30 feet inside, was a shape. Not fully formed, more like the suggestion of a figure. It was darker than the shadows around it, as though the night itself had thickened there. And it was facing me. I didn't wait. Panic surged through me like fire and I bolted. My legs carried me faster than I thought possible, gravel scattering beneath my shoes. I didn't look back, not once. My lungs burned, my chest ached, but I ran until I reached my grandparents' door and slammed it shut behind me. My grandmother was in the kitchen when I stumbled in, trembling, breathless. She rushed over, clutching my shoulders, asking what happened. I stammered out the story, the voice, the figure, the words it spoke. Her face paled. She exchanged a glance with my grandfather, who had quietly entered the room. He sat down heavily at the table and said, almost in a whisper, "It's happened again." I asked what he meant, desperate for answers. He told me about the stories, whispers passed down for decades in the town. Travelers who walked by the cemetery late at night sometimes heard voices. The voices always knew their names. Sometimes they warned, other times they beckoned. But always they seemed to come from the restless souls buried there. My grandfather said some believed it was the dead trying to save the living from danger, while others believed it was the dead trying to lure the living into their world. What if I had listened? I asked. My voice shook, partly from fear, partly from exhaustion. My grandmother touched my arm and whispered, "You did. By running." I hardly slept that night. Every creak of the old house made me jump, every shadow on the wall seemed like it was moving. And even now, years later, I can still hear it when I think too hard about that night. That rasping voice etched into my memory. Don't go. I often wonder what it meant. Don't go into the cemetery? Don't go to the shop? Or don't go home? That last thought haunts me most. Because what if it wasn't warning me? What if it was trying to keep me there, away from what awaited me further down the road? What if, in running, I did exactly what it wanted? If you made it this far, then I know these stories got under your skin. There are countless more chilling encounters like this, and I'll be sharing them all here. So if you love true ghost stories that stay with you long after the video ends, make sure you subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, would you dare to walk through a graveyard alone at night?